Welcome to the Royals Rundown Podcast, a Kansas City Royals podcast presented by Royals Review. I am Jake Milham, joined by Jeremy Greco, as always. Jeremy, before we introduce our guest, how are you feeling tonight, man?
I am at my first full week of work for the first time since a little bit before Christmas, if we're being honest, which maybe I shouldn't be that honest. But, I'm tired. It's been a long week.
It's I've already put in 3 days of work. Isn't the weekend supposed to come now? Isn't that how that works?
Three whole days is just that's too many already. 1 or 2, I think, tops.
Too much. Well, hey, we're here to talk about Kansas City Royals baseball, not labor practices in the work week. So if you want to keep updated on the Kansas City Royals, you got to go visit royalsreview.com. You can also find them on X and on Facebook at Royals Review. You can support the podcast further by following us on X, not Twitter, at Royal Rundown Pod. But if you want to engage with us and want to make your voice heard, the best way to do that is check out our polls and Q&As on Spotify. Each week we give you a chance to answer our questions, and we will read your responses on air in the following episode. So in our last episode, which was just with Preston Farr earlier on this week, thank you again, Preston, for coming on with us. We asked you, the listeners, who is your favorite prospect in the Royals system right now? A lot of good choices and a lot of good choices that Preston brought up for that title. Let's go ahead and run through our responses. Isom Benson said Tyler Gentry and Carson Rockefort are his choices. Gotta love that. Friend of the podcast, Lux, said my alter ego, Frank Mazzucato. I don't put you two together there, Lux. I will say that, but I haven't seen you two in the same room, so that's something. Royal Rupert said pitcher Cooper McKeon and then hitter Rivertown. I will say that Rivertown has an 80 grade name in the Royal system. I will say that. And then Steve said Will Klein. Will hopefully be making his MLB debut at some point this year. A very exciting prospect. All right, y'all, let's get to our very special guest. We've been talking about him for weeks, and that this episode is finally here. He is a senior writer over at FanGraphs, the one and only Dan Szymborski. Dan, how are we doing tonight, man?
We're doing well. When you mentioned Rivertown, which gives me some memories that aren't related at all to the player called Rivertown. When I was a kid, there was a local kind of a Chuck E. Cheese variant place in Baltimore called Rivertown, which had all the stuff. It had the animatronic antebellum South dog band playing bluegrass and a lot of video games, including this game called World Series Baseball in the 80s, which was not licensed in any way. But so when you say Rivertown, I think of those memories. The animatronic still lives on, even though the company went out of business a long time ago. Apparently, they were adopted by a company in England who are displaying it.
Dan, I ain't gonna lie, that kind of sounds terrifying.
I liked it as a kid, but when it's fun to see dogs playing washboard, the washboard and all the various and the blowing on the jugs. Those are fun things as a kid. They weren't that scary. They were just big, friendly robot dogs. Not like I think people are thinking of the Five Nights at Freddy's, which did not exist that time. And that's done for animatronic animals what a lot of media has done for clowns over the last 30 years.
Yeah, that's true. I did like that movie. Did you see it, Dan? The Five Nights at Freddy's?
I did not. I'm aware of it, but I'm not really into jump scare games, so I never really got into it.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
fair enough.
I'm right there with you. I'm glad to have a fellow jump scare avoider on this podcast with us today. There's a long pause for a very poor word choice, but we're gonna move on.
Yeah, that we are. Dan, first off, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for coordinating with Jeremy to get on the pod. Jeremy, before you start with the questions, Dan, do you mind telling our listeners, if they have no clue who you are, can you just give them a little short bio?
Well, here's the thing. Given some of the projections for the Royals over the years, it's usually best to keep people not knowing who I am, because once they know who I am, they're going to decide that they don't like me, which is an unfortunate situation for a writer to be in. I'm the developer of what you might have seen at FanGraphs as its projection system, which I developed 20 years ago. I kind of started it. It's a work in progress because there's a lot more data available now, a lot more computing power available now. ZiPS today would not even run on my computer in 2004. In fact, I think it would have taken up most of the hard drive, if my timeline is correct. And I've been a writer for a long time. Most people know me from either FanGraphs or ESPN, where I was for 2010 to 2018 exclusively. Now I'm at FanGraphs, and I do a lot of projection stuff, and I do a lot of getting mad at baseball things and writing words and hoping that the people who are also mad are mad in the same direction as me. But you know how it is when you're a writer. There's no purpose in writing unless someone gets mad.
I've definitely noticed that. I'll write one article that's like, oh, the Royals might be good. And I'll have people going, oh, that's not possible. And then I'll write another one that says, I think the Royals are actually pretty bad. And they go, no, they're actually good. So you're absolutely right. There's no winning. If someone's not angry, you didn't write anything.
Yeah. Except maybe like instruction manuals. I don't want to buy like a stand-on mixer and have it make me very angry.
I've definitely gotten mad at instruction manuals. I'm not going to lie.
I don't think that's intended though. But I guess that people assume that I'm notorious, like I have a special hate for the Royals simply because I made a lot of Dayton Moore cartoons in MS Paint over the last 15 years or so.
So good.
He was always kind of fun to draw in my childish MS Paint quality, which actually reflects me actually trying to draw. People think it's kind of aping the style of a 5-year-old, but I actually just draw like a 5-year-old.
Oh, okay. So you come by it honestly, at least.
Yeah, it's not ironic drawing. That's how I actually draw. It's sad.
It happens.
So you said you created the ZiPS, or at least the proto ZiPS, about 20 years ago. So can you tell us a little bit about what got you into baseball analytics and what led to the creation of ZiPS? And was that before or after you were kind of into the writing aspect? And how did those mix?
Well, I started off, I mean, I was a huge baseball fan as a child, and I was a huge reader as a child. So my grandfather pretty much aggressively got me books to read in the 80s about baseball. And so as a kid, I was born in 1978. As a kid, I read pretty much all the baseball abstracts except the first few, the Elias Baseball Analysts, Palmer Thorne, Hidden Game of Baseball. So I read all that as a little kid. So I was always very baseball nerdery inclined. In the mid-90s, I got involved in Usenet, which no one will remember unless they're at least like my age. It was kind of what Twitter was, if Twitter was a technologically difficult method that mostly people in college used. And that's kind of where a lot of the internet sabermetric community came from. Most of the baseball prospectus people, Sean Foreman, Vosh McCracken, all those people, we were all kind of yelling at each other on Usenet and being mean to web TV users, which was a thing. There was a lot of mean snidiness towards people who had their TV as a computer. Which I mean, those lines have been blurred over the years. But you see, we would make fun of first the AOL user, then the web TV users, because it seemed like a downside. But anyway, I digress. So I was involved in the sabermetric community for a long time. In 2001, Sean Foreman asked me to write for a new site they were launching called Baseball Think Factory, Baseball Primer for the first couple of years. And so I wrote for them, and I was interested in projections since the mid-90s. A fellow and early collaborator of mine named Chris Dial, who's a good friend, he was on the board of Sabre for several years. He was kind of the guy who spearheaded the Rawlings Saber Gold Glove award changes. We talked at first about doing kind of a basic projection system, kind of what Tom Tango did later with Marcel. Never got back to it, and then as I was starting to write in 2001, 2002, I kind of wanted to revisit that idea. And then one thing led to another, and the projections kind of worked as well as projections can work, to my surprise. And after Moneyball hit, everybody kind of became employable. And so, one thing led to another, and I have a very weird career now.
I love that you kind of were ahead of the game with the Moneyball, and then kind of wrote it in.
People always were you smarter than everyone? Like, no, I just got in on the ground floor and hung around people who were smarter than me, and people assumed that it kind of rubbed off.
I gotta find maybe a new podcast co-host. I gotta find someone smarter than me, Jacob.
Wow. Well, I mean, you know what? It's the bar's pretty low. Jeremy. I will say that.
So the projection system. I know that we're not supposed to just look at the projected WARs and be like, oh yeah, this means this is what's going to happen, and these are the number of wins that the team's going to get. But as fans, when we look at these ZiPS projections, what can we take away from it?
I think generally the player projections are easier to interpret. I've been doing more and more to post kind of percentile data for people so they can kind of get the range of expectation, which is very wide, as you might notice when you look at 80th versus 20th percentiles. And even with those wide numbers, it's still only 60% confident that it'll be between those numbers. The problems and why I always get a little grumpy about on the team level is because when I simulate teams for a season, I'm not just taking ZiPS doesn't just take all the median projections and throw them all together and count the WAR. I've done a lot of work in an effort to try to better express a team's depth. In which case ZiPS sims a million years, and and each player has a distribution of plate appearances that are possible within a season. So some seasons, X player will be fully healthy. Some seasons they'll be, out for the year with an injury, and ZiPS will fill in the at-bats from players farther down on the depth chart. So that kind of thing, the idea is to get a little more accurate for certain kinds of teams. For instance, ZiPS tends to like the Rays and Cardinals better because in most years, not so much last year for the Cardinals, those teams tend to have very good depth and less downside, so that when they lose players, they can fill them in. While ZiPS tends to be lower on, say, the Mets, especially during the Jeff Wilpon era, because the Mets always had this tendency to have a team that looked great if everybody stayed healthy and nothing went wrong, and then like a complete train wreck the second anyone got injured. So when you add up the WAR like that, you don't necessarily get a true estimate of exactly where a team is. So I try to discourage people from doing that, because if I don't, then people will say ZiPS says this, and then I have to say, no, that's not what ZiPS says. So see, now I can just refer people to a thread of violence in the FanGraphs page. Actually, Carson Sestilli wrote that thread of violence when he was the editor and I was working for ESPN still, but I decided to keep that thread.
Fair.
Because any good threat has to be maintained consistently.
Of course.
Absolutely. One of the things that I loved, quote unquote, in your Royal ZiPS projections that you had this year was that the relievers as a group, you projected for negative 0.1 WAR, which is just insane. You said in the article that you'd never seen that, or you didn't know how long it had been since you'd seen that. Have you been able to do any research to figure out how long it's been since a team had a position group do that?
Yeah, I went through a bunch of the old depth chart graphics. Unfortunately, I didn't really archive the ZiPS rundown simply because they come at different times of the off season for different teams, and it's not really a useful kind of comparison tool. Mm-hmm. But I did find a Rockies year a while ago when they had that. And of course, as people know, if I'm not being mean to the Rockies, I'm probably being mean to the Royals. I mean, other way around, but still, yeah.
Why not both? Why not both?
Yeah, you can do both.
RO names.
But I try to spread. Well, generally speaking, at some point I will be accused of hating every team in baseball. Kind of the Keith Law principle, I think, is what I call that. So I when I'm really tough on a team, it's really because I don't think they're run all that well. And when a team is run better, then I will be a lot more positive about it. I was extremely negative about the Orioles during their previous administration, the late Dan Duquette years. Excuse me, when Jim Duquette was there, and when Flanagan was there. I thought it was a pretty poorly run franchise, and I've been a lot nicer to, the current Orioles, even when they've had poor seasons, because I think they've generally been better run in recent years. Now the owner is another case, but we don't need to get into that since this is a Royals podcast, not an Orioles podcast. But generally speaking, I try to be fair. I just don't really think the Royals or Rockies are particularly well run.
Yeah, that's history doesn't say so. Dan, history kind of sides with you there. Yeah, I would love to pick your brain about the Baltimore ownership situation, but that is for another time because I don't know if you know this, Dan. I'm actually in Hampton Roads, Virginia, where the Tides are. So I have a very, very close connection to the Orioles. I will say.
You know who is well run? The Phillies.
My wife is a raging Phillies fan, and she loves to remind me that they are well run. Dan, can you please tell my wife that they're not well run for the most part? They just like to throw money at the problem.
I don't think they're terribly run. I think they're kind of average-ish.
Average.
Throwing money at the problem hasn't worked time and again, though, has it?
The thing about the Phillies is they do target a lot of their free agent acquisitions very well, but they have to kind of lose credit from the farm system during their rebuild because they didn't really get a ton from that farm system. If you compare, because the Phillies and Braves kind of rebuilt at the same time, and you compare what the Braves got to what the Phillies got.
Yeah.
This was the Liberty Bell Phillies podcast.
Yeah, we're all over the place so far tonight. Jeremy, get us back on the road, man. You gotta help drive the bus, bro.
All right, so you said that you feel like the Royals haven't been well run, but a lot of Royals fans, including Jacob and myself, are kind of excited about the way they've approached free agency this year. Does ZiPS bear that out? Does that seem like maybe they're turning a corner at all to you?
I think the fundamental problem with the Royals is they've made a lot of signings that make sense, but they make sense for a better team. I think is where they are. This is a team. See, I don't really rag on teams when they're not spending a lot when they're rebuilding because I think you want to save your ammunition. But I don't think that the signings they made are when you've put that 80-win team in-house together, those are the kinds of signings you make to put yourself over the top. You don't make those kinds of signings to turn a 70-win team into a 75-win team. Now, of course, the AL Central, there's a lower threshold for making the playoffs by winning the division. And it's the Royals will project with, a legitimate low single-digit percentage chance of making the playoffs, but it wouldn't be the craziest thing ever. I just think that necessarily some of these signings have been the right signings at the wrong time. I think they should have, if you want to be the Rays or a team that continually competes on a lower budget, then you have to be kind of merciless in a lot of ways, and they need to have the sheer focus on putting that foundation together. And I don't think that foundation is there. So just throwing on top players on top of that, I don't think that's necessarily going to get them where they want to go. It's just not the most efficient way, and it's hard to rag too hard on them for this because they're trying. I just don't think they're really going to see the gains that they hope to get from it.
That's totally reasonable. I think that even our optimism is a little, what's the word I'm looking for, Jacob?
Tempered.
Yeah. That's
There you go, Dan.
Szymborski's got my mind read here. So we're excited, but it's like, hey, maybe they won't lose 100 games. That would be nice.
We have a low bar to clear, just like the AL Central.
I was curious. I'm kind of going all over the place now because I refer to my questions and then don't want to refer to my questions and want to be more organic, but that's just how it is, I guess.
Let's have a conversation.
I was curious, have teams ever contacted you and tried to get you to work in their front office? Have the Royals ever contacted you and tried to get you to work in their front office?
I can't say any specific teams just for one of the things, anything I talk about is off record with teams, and if I can't say specifically. I have talked with teams about that. I just don't think it's the best fit for me. I sell a lot of data to teams. I sell data to teams. I sell data to player agents. I sell data to sports books. I don't offer advisory opinions though, and I think that may put me in a real conflict of interest if I'm expressing opinions on things. It's basically, can you sell us this data? Sure, and I'll say this costs Y percentage. I'll hit Y dollars. I'll hit the button and send it to you without any commentary on what I give. I just don't know I don't think personally I'm temperamentally suited to work for a front office full time. It's one thing to sell data. It doesn't require, but I don't want to move. I don't want to drive into an office every day. I don't want to give up the writing part. A lot of people who are kind of in the sabermetrics and analytics, a lot of them seek them almost slumming it as writers in the hopes of landing the front office job. But for me, a big part of why I like what I do is I like writing, I like communicating, I like interacting with people who read me, people who hate me. That's a lot of fun, and I like being able to talk about other teams, and I like being able to have all my work product belong to me. When I work for ESPN, everything ZiPS belonged to me. FanGraphs doesn't own a piece of ZiPS. That all belongs to me. And that's kind of how I'm the most comfortable. And the fact is, I don't know if I would be a good fit temperamentally because I don't do well with authority as it comes down. That part of that is my upbringing where I was kind of raised to have disdain for anyone trying to tell me something to do. Because I come from a whole family of people who had that kind of difficulty with authority. Oh. I just like what I do better than working for a team. So in the end, unless a team offered me so much in which it would be an objectively poor idea for them, I don't see myself moving anywhere. But I'll never say never. Jeff Sullivan was someone who said he would never work for a team until a team gave him a spin on the job that made him change his mind. So I don't want to say, no, I'll never work for a team, but I like what I do. I like where I am. I'm 45. I'm probably past the halfway point. I got my Hall of Fame vote in 2 years, and I'd like to have that one. I don't want to take a job that makes me lose that, like after year 9 of being in the Baseball Writers Association.
Sure.
That'd be very poor planning. I need people to get mad at my Hall of Fame ballot when I don't vote for slam dunks. And people are going to be mad because, as I've talked about, I do not prioritize voting for players who are slam dunk near 100% candidates.
Game day internship with the Omaha Storm Chasers is the perfect opportunity for a college student interested in exploring a career in the sports industry. Storm Chasers interns have the chance to work in almost every aspect of game day and event operations at Warner Park, while gaining knowledge about the inner workings of minor league baseball. There's no better way to learn and grow while discovering your passions and goals than becoming a part of our Chasers family. To learn more about internship opportunities with the Storm Chasers, head to omahastormchasers.com or email Ania Tate, ANIYAT, at omahastormchasers.com.
Everyone get on your feet, stir up the storm, we're family.
Prioritize for those fringe guys, Dan.
Yeah, it's very fortunate for me that I wasn't a voter before Derek Jeter's election, because I would have been the second vote not, because he easily got in.
Yeah.
Sure.
Since I also believe ethically that all votes should be public, I'd be public about it, and then I could never go to New York again. And I do enjoy going there from time to time. So I was fortunate not to have to do that.
That's a good point, Dan. Hey, I got two off the wall questions for you. First, are you a small hall or a big hall guy?
I guess in a perfect world, I'd be a small hall guy, but
Okay.
I'm a hall as it currently exists guy. And if X level of player gets into the Hall of Fame for the last 90 years, then X type player should still get in the Hall of Fame, because I don't think an honor stays an honor if it's kind of arbitrary what level of honor it represents.
Makes sense.
It's a weird way of putting it, but
It's really not fair to a ball player to like move the goalposts on them in a sense. Is that what you're saying, Dan?
yeah, I mean, it's weird to tell pitchers, Jack Morris is in the Hall of Fame, but you can't be, even though you're a lot better than Jack Morris. To keep it Royals centric, one thing I noted when Jack Morris was a terrible candidate for a long time, that basically the difference between Kevin Appier and Jack Morris is if Appier came back and pitched horribly for 5 years, like an ERA of like 6.5, then he would match Morris's innings pitched and ERA plus.
Dang.
Jack Morris is Kevin Appier plus a whole bunch of the worst seasons in baseball history. And I don't think it's fair for players to be held to significantly higher standards than they used to. People have this idea that the Hall of Fame is getting cheaper, and that is complete, absolute bollocks. You look at like some of the years in the 30s, there was even a year, I think it was 1939, I don't remember offhand, in which more than 25% of plate appearances by position players were future Hall of Famers.
Oh my gosh.
And a lot of those 30s and early 40s, the percentage of plate appearances by Hall of Famers, position player wise, was over 20%. And through history, it's generally been steady at 12 to 15%. So then you drop to today and you look at like the 90s and the 80s, and you have kind of it being between like 7 and 10%. It's not that the Hall of Fame is becoming more selective. Less selective. It's becoming a lot more selective. Because people kind of have this idea that Babe Ruth is the average Hall of Famer, and that's really not the case. It's more like, Eddie Murray is an average first base Hall of Famer, or George Kell. Those are kind of the ordinary Hall of Famers. And I think that we should honor players consistently, or we should start kicking players out. And I prefer to honor more players than kind of tell, Tommy McCarthy's shade, you actually weren't that good. So we're just going to kind of kick you out. And we're not putting you in the Hall of Very Good either. We're putting you in the David DeJesus Hall.
Dang. Okay. All right. That's a whole separate hall. I'm trying to think of where that hall would even be at. I think it'd be somewhere in like.
I didn't mean to David DeJesus, but he's kind of the first royal outfielder of that level I thought of.
Yeah. No, I completely understand that, and I appreciate your backing or your reason, excuse me, for the small hall versus big hall, because I know that's going to be an ongoing debate for years. For forever. And I don't think that there is a right answer either way. I can kind of understand both ideas. But in that vein, can I ask about Carlos Beltrán? Because if you had a ballot, would you?
He'd be in
for him?
easy.
Yeah,
That's not even close.
Well, I know the Houston stuff kind of affected his first go on the ballot, so I didn't know if you understood that point of view or shared it possibly.
It's let's just say it's a little complex.
Yeah.
The character clause is not that clear cut. The thing is, while if he were if he were a borderline candidate, I would consider it a fair objection to him. I don't consider it's kind of the same with steroid use post 2004. I don't consider it. Some writers consider it kind of a magic red switch that you do that, you're out. I tend to think of it as more of a shading in which I would use those kind of things to not vote for a borderline candidate. For example, if Andy Pettitte had been busted post 2004, that would actually be enough, I think, to make him a no for me for sure. Right now, he's kind of on the border for me, along with Mark Burley. But in the case of Beltrán, I think he's so far over the line that giving him a demerit for his association with the sign stealing, the trash can banging, I don't consider that as big a deal. And I also tend to believe that these things were a little more widespread around baseball than is commonly known. I think a lot of teams were kind of pushing the envelope a bit, given inconsistent messaging about technology and this in baseball. And of course, we've seen it with the Astros most notably, but you have the issue with the Red Sox where they kind of all just threw kind of a mid-level employee under the bus. There have been all sorts of whispers about it, and it's good to enforce these things and have a clear rules set out. But I don't kind of think it's the end of the world. I mostly just like to make trash can jokes.
They're easy. They're easy.
Yeah,
and cheap,
I have
like trash cans.
I have a T-shirt I made myself for the Astros, which if you've played Legend of Zelda, the original one, hopefully we'll get some nods.
Yes,
when you start off the quest, you're saying, "Here, take the sword," in that little room with the guy.
Right.
I replaced it with a digital trash can and said, "Pictures are hard. Take this." And I had that as a T-shirt that I wear once in a while.
Oh, I love it.
So I like the jokes. I don't really get that much rage about these things, but I do like making jokes about them, and that's kind of my modus operandi in a way. I like to amuse myself. I guess a lot of things are for the purpose of amusing myself. Like probably 90% of the AI photos I do on Twitter are mostly me amusing myself.
Mm-hmm. Just to see
They
how
amuse
crazy
me
it gets.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hey.
I'm never quite sure how people feel about them. I think there's general annoyance and people put up with them because of the projection stuff that they find useful.
You're never gonna make everyone happy, Dan. That's
I just got to tell you that there was I think you did the Republican convention as a spaghetti feast or something like that.
Yeah, I love.
I think about that every day.
I love spaghetti AIs. I love AIs of people eating spaghetti messily.
all right. That's
I've talked
really
about
random.
this. Spaghetti is the great equalizer of humanity, because when you eat spaghetti with a very thick sauce on it, no matter who you are, whether you are a person who's living on the street and eating at a food donation society, or you're the Queen of England, when anyone eats spaghetti, you are about 10 seconds for a disaster that's going to ruin your day.
Yeah, it is. I never thought about it being the great equalizer. I kind of think of like chicken wings.
Some people say death is the great equalizer because it's the one thing we all share in common. But spaghetti is less macabre than that.
Very much so.
A little bit. It's still red and just like, it could look like a crime scene.
I mean, spaghetti at Olive Garden is pretty macabre, if you ask me.
And and people try to avoid that, just like they avoid death, by taking the shapes that don't make as much of a mess. But if you're only eating rigatoni and penne rigate and elbow macaroni, you haven't really lived until you've been on the line. I'm talking, spaghetti, fettuccine, linguine, tagliatelle.
I'm an angel hair stan over here.
Oh,
yeah,
look at you.
You have to have some risk in your eating, and those pastas have an additional risk that you have to take to eat them, so that you eating them successfully is a victory.
I love it. Dan, I got one more off the wall question before I pass it back off to Jeremy. You were talking about who you sell some of your data to, and my ears kind of perked up when you said sports books, because that's something that people are following a little bit more closely as sports betting becomes more accessible and legal across the United States. I'm curious, have you read a book called Trading Bases by Joe Petta?
I haven't. The name is familiar.
Okay.
My interest in gambling, I do a little bit, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I have to be careful though. Like, for instance, I don't bet on NL awards anymore, because I almost had a really awkward situation because I had bet 200 on Christian Yelich to be the MVP that year, year that breakout season, and then I realized that I might be called to vote on it, which would be a huge ethical issue.
Yeah.
So I'd have to turn down the vote. So I don't vote on NL awards anymore.
Okay.
I'm not kind of a gambling personality. I like to eke out small bits of money here and there. I mean, I'm the guy that doesn't dream of playing No Limit Hold'em in the World Series of Poker. I like eking out small sums playing Limit Poker or Limit Omaha or things like that. That's just how I am, and I personally prefer selling data to entities than gambling on the data. Wow, when possible.
Okay. Do you know how they use that data?
I ask as little information about that kind of thing as possible.
All right.
Even for teams and players, it's because I am a writer, and it's best for everyone if you just take the data and you do what you want with it. It's like when you sell like if you're like a knife salesman or however the kids buy knives today. You don't necessarily want to know what's going to be done with the knives. And ZiPS is not that dangerous.
I gotcha.
No one's going to call for regulation of ZiPS. I don't think that'd be a very weird.
Royals fans, might.
a very maybe Royals fans
and Rockets.
It's just easier that way because I won't sign any non-disclosure agreements. So anything you tell me, I'm going to use if you tell me. Because it's hard to completely be unaware of knowledge.
Yeah.
And of course, you end up having some weird, fun things. Like one of my highlights, I can't say the player. One of my professional highlights personally was when both a team and a player's agent bought the exact same data from me about the player, and then they negotiated the exact contract I projected. So I was like, I made this happen.
That's awesome. Really cool.
I mean, I didn't really make it happen, but it was very pleasing.
No, you were closer to make it happening than when I feel like I made a win happen because I wore my hat sideways or something, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm sadly reached the age where I can only wear hats straight up. See, in my 20s, I could wear my baseball cap backwards. I can't do that at 45.
Just doesn't fit anymore, right, Dan? Doesn't fit the vibe.
Yeah, it's not that I'm mature; it's just too old.
Okay. Hey, Jeremy, I'm sorry. I got one more book question for Dan before I forget about it. Dan, you know the book, The Only Rule Is It Has to Work? Have you read that one?
Yes, I do.
What do you think about that? Like, what were you were in the industry for a long time when that story happened and came out afterwards. What were your thoughts on that real world exercise?
I thought it was a lot of fun. It was almost like a Gonzo-esque experiment more than anything that they were working with.
Yeah.
No, that was a whole lot of fun. Unless there's some sort of dark reference in it that I'm not catching up right now.
No,
like
no.
it's like
Oh, you're curious.
It's like, oh, you didn't read the chapter where Ben Lindbergh murdered someone? Like, oh, I must have missed that one.
Oh my god! I just wanted to ask you, Dan. Sorry. Back to you, Jeremy. Get us back on the road. I'm getting us off.
I'm ready to just take us even further, honestly.
Oh my gosh!
Because I've been chomping at the bit this whole time. Everybody who listens to this podcast knows that I am a huge gamer and that I love the Trails series. But what you may not know is that Mr. Dan Szymborski loves it, I think, at least as much as I do. So Dan, just evangelize about the Trails series for us for a minute, because I need someone else's words here.
Well, the thing is, see, I like epics. I like big, long storylines, and the Trails series, the Kaseki series, depending on where you come from it's a shared world. I like world building, and I like big, long, sweeping arcs. That's kind of why I like Game of Thrones, the Song of Ice and Fire series, when it seemed to actually be written. Not so much anymore. But the Trails games are fun because you essentially have, 3 plus 2, you have, 11, 12, depending on what you count, games that are all kind of the same overarching storyline. And I love the details in these games. I love that you have little storylines that are not even important from like NPCs. Like you can see NPCs in the first Trails in the Sky game being married in the second and be visiting Crossbell in the fifth. And I'm a sucker for that kind of thing. And I'm a sucker really for JRPGs in general. So it's right up my alley. And I tend to enjoy the soundtracks, the scores in the Trails series as much as a lot of the Final Fantasy series, which I've also played all through. Yeah. I mean, I played Final Fantasy V back before it was translated, before the fan translation in the 90s. I played it on emulator in Japanese without knowing anything that was going on. I played during the COVID year. I played through the Japanese Cold Steel 4 because this was at the start of the pandemic and I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen. So I figured I might want to try to get some closure. And I also played through that without knowing Japanese. I wish I knew Japanese. This would make some of these things a lot easier.
Yeah,
I bet.
I'm a huge JRPG player too, and I'm always thinking, man, if I just knew Japanese, think about all the games I could play that I can't play, or what order I could do things in, or all this stuff.
It's better than it used to be. Now Falcom kind of translates things rather slowly. Because they have a smaller company and they just want to be cruel to me. But it was worse for RPGs kind of in the 80s and 90s when you talk about the Super Nintendo and in late Nintendo RPGs, in which very little teams seemed to get over. So like every series had like half of it not be in the United States. And of course it was the same with Final Fantasy because the original 2, 3, and 5 were not in the United States.
Right.
I mean, we even get the real Mario Brothers too.
Right. True. They were watching a video about that recently. Crazy.
Because they released it later as part of the Super that Mario re-release, the Lost Levels they called it, and of course Super Mario 2 wasn't even a Super Mario game. It was just kind of a game called Doki Doki Panic that they just threw in some new characters on top to make it Mario related, and that's what it was like. They didn't really seem to think that it would sell in the United States, even with being a much bigger market. And I was always sad because you'd always see these games and you couldn't get them. And I mean, in 1992, I was 14. I had zero access to import games from Japan and somehow play them. So they were just like forbidden fruit. But it's a lot better now. And even with Falcom games, you can find translations. I played through the Crossbell games the first time with a fan translation. Also, Kuro no Kiseki, I guess Trails of Dawn is what they call it now. I played through that with a translation. Cold Steel 4, of course, I did with a translation. Well, that I'd reference, just the general spreadsheet. So it's much better nowadays, I think, overall.
Oh yeah, I got very lucky. I got into Cold Steel 2022 was the first time I played Trails of Cold Steel, and so that was right before they were coming out with the Crossbell games. And I don't have the willpower to go the translation route, and I pretty much only play on console, so emulation's not really in an option for me. So I was very fortunate that it's like, oh, by the way, these 2 games that have not been available in English are finally going to be available in English. So yeah, I definitely get you on that. I was gonna say something else and then it escaped my brain.
It happens, Jeremy, to the best of us.
The translations, they actually, because the late translations of the Crossbell games were done by Geofront, and they actually used a lot of the Geofront translation for the official translation.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I've it's always cool to see like when the fan translations get kind of respected like that, and they're like, okay, yeah, we'll deal with you, and you. I mean, it saves them work, and people who's had a lot of passion get some credit for it and hopefully some money.
Now Kevin Goldstein's also a Trails player. He's played through most of the games. As you guys know, Kevin Goldstein.
Yeah, I know the name.
So I mean, I've always been a big gamer. I got an Atari when I was 4, then I got a Nintendo when I was 8, and then I mean, I don't get every console anymore. That kind of died off in the 90s. Like I did not have the desire or the parents willing enough to spend that much for like a 3DO, which fell apart pretty quickly anyway. But and it was a lot of what I really enjoyed doing is I loved when I was at ESPN that I got to write on the esports side for a few years. That was a lot of fun. I covered some Hearthstone tournaments. I covered some Overwatch. I got to release a couple Hearthstone cards, which was fun. But I'd love to do game writing again. It just hasn't really worked out that way.
Yeah, before I got into baseball writing, I was trying to find my way into game writing, and it's a lot tougher than to even get like a blog level kind of writing gig as a video game writer than as a sports writer, even, it seems.
And the other problem is I'm probably be like the oldest person in the
because you're not that much older than me, Dan.
But when I'm like in a Twitch stream or I'm on Discord, I am the old man now. And the thing is, when I broke into Sabermetrics, I was like one of the young guys. It was Dave Cameron and I who were like the really young guys because we were still teenagers. Dave's like, I think 2 years younger than me. But we're not the young guys anymore. Now like some of the college students who asked me for advice. I mean, I could have been like their dad really easily. And I still am amazed that someone my age can be trusted with a child, because I certainly could not be trusted to care for a human being that doesn't have a source of income on their own. But I've grown old in this career, and that's kind of depressing in a way.
Better than the alternative.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, before we move on, I do want to ask, do you have a favorite sub-series in the Trails Kiseki series?
Oh, that's hard. I think on some levels Crossbell is my favorite, just because I like how the city is a character essentially in it more than it is in Sky and Cold Steel. I mean, I love those games, but in Cold Steel you don't have the same attachment to kind of areas, and the game kind of builds up Crossbell as a more meaningful place. Like in Cold Steel, there's places you visit, but they kind of change from game to game, and you don't get to see them that often again. Like you saw like Keldick and Legram in the first few, but then you didn't see him at the end. Or actually, you did see Legram, but I don't think anyone really cares about the individual places in Cold Steel that weren't in the later games. I know you do, but Crossbell was pretty consistent, and I think Crossbell was kind of when they hit their stride story wise, like the Trails in the Sky. That's a terrific series, but the first game is a slow burner.
Yeah.
It doesn't really take off for a while. The third game is fun in kind of a meta way, but it's kind of like a Gaiden game, not really a full storyline. Even though Kevin and Riez are a lot of fun, I guess fun isn't the right, but they were compelling characters.
Yes.
So I think Crossbell is kind of where they hit like their biggest stride, and I think that the current sub series kind of has that potential too. Now you haven't played it, so I don't want to spoil anything about Kurno Kaseki Trails in the Dawn, but it was they really got right into the storyline. There wasn't a lot of fetch quest type things that overrode everything.
Yeah, I'm working on it. I promise I am. I got a little burned out, so I got to take a little break, but I'm gonna get back to it. Trails in the Sky is still, I think, my favorite, just because Estelle is my favorite protagonist of any game I've ever played.
Estelle's tons of fun. Now, so you stopped at the end of Cold Steel 2.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not actually the worst place to stop off, simply because there's a full year and year and a half between the events.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting back to it. There's so many games to play.
Yeah, you will go back. Yeah, there's a lot more Crossbell in 3 and 4. You'll see a ton of Crossbell.
That'll be good.
I'm not going to spoil any plot things, but you'll see most of the old gang again.
Oh, that's cool. I'm looking forward to it. All right. So I guess it's probably about time to wrap it up, as Jacob is looking at me like, what are you doing? So we like to do Royals reviews here, where we just kind of talk about things that we're watching, reading, whatever, and throw them out there. So like I said, I usually throw out some video games. I've been throwing out a lot of Marvel's Midnight Suns for the last week and a half.
Oh, take a break, Jeremy. God.
Yeah, I just got that in a Humble Bundle. I still haven't played it.
You've got to play it, and then you've got to tell me what you think about it, because I am obsessed with this game. It's so flawed and so full of bugs, but so good underneath that. And I want a sequel where they can like clean up all that stuff.
Yeah, I guess for me, I mean, I don't think I've really been playing anything new for the last month, because it's just been busy with holidays and zips and stuff.
Sure.
And I'm still playing a lot of MLB The Show. Usually I kind of move on at the end of the year, but I've been going back to play the ones I hadn't played because I didn't have a PS5 until earlier this year.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm actually doing a lot of MLB The Show 21 and 22 also.
How are I've been playing 23, and I've talked to you about MLB The Show 23. How are the Diamond Dynasties in those? Is it similar to 23?
It's very similar.
I'd love that same experience. I went back to 19 and I'm like, this is not the same thing.
Yeah, 2022, I mean, 21 is where it becomes kind of modern, with the same kind of experience. Some of the moments were a little trickier. There's a lot where you had to get 8 total bases in a game.
Oof.
Which it was brutal. They've made them a bit easier now, but you definitely feel a reward. And there was kind of a different cadence because they weren't in the same season format as it was now. And so players generally had lower ratings in April, and you'd get better cards as the year went on. So like all your cards, when you start off, all like the top cards in April for MLB The Show 21 were like 88, 89, 90 ratings. And then as the season went on, they introduced the power creep, and they kind of tried to change that up this recently by having the individual seasons so that they can encourage turnover of rosters just by cards becoming unavailable.
Gotcha.
Yeah, right.
So you saw 99s in April, which you didn't in 21.
Gotcha. Okay, that's cool. I'll have to check that out.
And I'm still market manipulating too, or maybe not manipulating, but I love making stubs the currency in MLB The Show for anyone who's not into that. I like to buy and sell some player arbitrage I actually have the maximum stubs in 2022. I did not realize that there was an overflow at 5 million. You can't have more than 5 million stubs. So I actually lost like 500,000 because I was selling a bunch of stuff. I'm like, oh God, it's like I didn't get more money. Where's my 500,000? I mean, I sold Nolan Ryan.
Yeah, you helped me so much with that and really kept me in MLB The Show 23 because before I started talking to you about that, I was getting frustrated at like some of the players I couldn't get.
Yeah, now you can get anyone.
Yeah, I immediately got the like Ellie De La Cruz cycle, which was just a really cool card, really cool story, and I've basically got all the cards that I care about now. So I'm not
that makes it fun.
The market myself, but it's really one of the things that's cool, and is that you can still do that in 21, 22, and this year, and go back and get all of those cards still.
Yeah, and the market is still relatively active, especially in 2022. In fact, since less people are really playing arbitrage in the old ones, it's actually more profitable in a way than the current game.
Huh. That's interesting.
Good to know. I'll have to keep that in mind when I go back to it. But let's go ahead and do our Royals reviews, I guess. Do you want to go ahead and kick us off, Jacob?
Yeah. I'll go and kick us off, and I will stick with the video game thread.
Ooh.
And I want to review. So the battle royale shooter that I play is Apex Legends by EA. It's a good little blend on the hero shooter and battle royale. I enjoy it. It's a nice way to kind of unplug mentally and just play a game. But they just started a crossover event with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth coming out. So like they have a whole bunch of cosmetics, and they have some game modes that feature elements of the Final Fantasy franchise, which it is a very odd crossover. I will say that I haven't gotten quite used to it. What I am gonna review, I guess, is more of the expanding prices of video game microtransactions, I will say.
Ooh.
So
it's a weird review. All right.
Yeah,
I'm here.
I picked this one because the big cosmetic that they have is they have a Buster Sword. Like you can buy a Buster Sword, and you like when you're running around the map, you'll just see a Buster Sword bouncing along with you. And it's pretty cool. But you have to buy all these other things ahead of it to unlock that. And it comes out to like $325 for this Buster Sword. Yeah. And
I'd want a real Buster Sword that you can pop off someone's head for
how much I'm getting a real one, thanks.
Exactly. And it is, listen,
it's just a cosmetic. It doesn't actually do anything, right?
In this game mode that they're doing, it does do something like you can block attacks and things like that to reduce damage. But I don't think it will after this crossover event, and it only runs until January 30th. And I don't know, it's more of back in my day, we didn't have transactions and you just bought the game and you unlocked everything and it was all right there. I think it's a little too much of the modern gaming industry leaning forward on trying to generate revenue. I understand Apex Legends is a free-to-play game. I do want to say that. But it was already setting records for revenue, and them doing this is only going to push that bar up. So I'm not too happy to see that, but if folks got the money, then they can spend it. Jeremy, back to you on reviews.
So other than Marvel's Midnight Suns, I do want to go ahead and shout out the new, still running actually, I believe, Percy Jackson series on Disney Plus, based on the popular young adult novel series, which I adored when I read it when I was a young adult, which was not that long ago, I don't think. But this is the second attempt at adapting it for the screen. The movies were... the first movie wasn't terrible. The second movie was bad. So I'm glad to see them taking another stab at it. I don't remember the books as well, so I can't be like, they changed this and they didn't change that and blah, blah, blah. But I'm enjoying it. I'm having a good time. I'm looking forward to watching it. They went with a younger cast this time, which is probably pretty smart. It's more authentic to the books, and they're good. Like a lot of times when you get a younger cast, you can justifiably kind of lose some acting chops, but they've done pretty good. I think I'm really enjoying it, and I'm looking forward to watching more of it. And so that's going to take us to you, Dan. You got a Royals review for us?
I don't see. I'm thinking of, I guess, new stuff wise. I haven't really played that much new stuff wise, and we talked about it a little. I've been playing a lot of MLB The Show. I've been finishing up a lot of stuff on Final Fantasy 14 since there's a new expansion coming out, which I will be playing when it comes out.
Nice.
If we talk next year, maybe I can review that. I am a sucker for crossover events in Final Fantasy 14 because there was a Final Fantasy 7 one. There was a Final Fantasy Tactics one where they basically tied up the loose ends from Final Fantasy Tactics, which isn't. Oh wow! You don't usually see a 30-year-old game get the loose ends wrapped up. So I've been playing a lot of like previous games. I did not too long ago. I played through Trails again because I had the fan translation of the second of the modern game, the Kuro no Kiseki Crimson Sin, and I like to go through that. Plus, the official release of Trails into Reverie came out, and I wanted to play that without it being translated. Because you get the voice acting. It's very confusing when they're speaking a language that you don't know. So I haven't done a lot of new media. I mean, I'm finally watching Homeland on Hulu, which I never really got around to in HBO. But I don't think I have a good new thing review.
That's okay.
Yeah,
I mean, old stuff is good too.
Yeah.
Give me this then. What's your favorite Final Fantasy game?
Oh, 6.
6?
Yeah, it's gotta be 6.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, I can hum like everybody's theme, like pretty easily. I love the score for that one. I love the leitmotifs that Uematsu used. I like that style. I don't know if I really like modern Final Fantasy music as much. 15, I don't think I really did. I liked 13 more than most people, but not really for the music.
It's my favorite.
Oh, what? Oh, music wise or
game wise? It's up there music wise too. It might not be my favorite music wise, but it's my favorite game.
Yeah, a lot of people are kind of sour on it though, but I liked it. And I think 6 was the well-rounded game. It was, you also, when you're talking about something like video games, you also like have memories of playing the games, which kind of change how you feel about them. So it's hard for something new to
absolutely
compete just because, I relate to them differently. Like when I got Final Fantasy VI, I had reserved it at Electronics Boutique like 3 months in advance, waiting for the release. It was the first place I drove to by myself with my new driver's license, Towson Town Center, on release day. And it was fun to bring it home, fire up the Super Nintendo, and it's hard to compete with like memories of that and how it went.
Sure.
I probably play through that game once every few years. The Pixel remaster I really enjoyed.
I gotta get those.
Oh, you gotta get it.
I don't have them yet.
No, they redid the soundtracks. They're all modernized. Now, I'm not one of those people who's obsessed with having the original chip tunes in there. I like the orchestrations. I have an absurd collection of video game music that's played by orchestras.
Me too.
And the Pixel remasters, which I played through pretty much all, I guess, was it 2022 or last year? I don't remember what year they came out. I guess it was 2022.
I don't remember either.
Well, they all have much better quality soundtracks, and they kept the games as they were. They just pretty much fixed bugs, remastered everything. And I think the Final Fantasy VI one is now the definitive version of Final Fantasy VI for me, because you get a better score for the opera. You get, the fuller experience. It was really nice, in 1994, but we could do better with the orchestrations nowadays.
Right. I not more than a few days passes without me thinking about that opening with the mechs walking through the snow and Terra's theme playing. It's just so iconic.
Yeah, the pseudo AT-ATs. The AT-AT walkers.
Yeah. Yep.
We're going to destroy the power at the Hoth Rebel base. Because it's in a snowstorm. You're basically going to fight rebels. So they had, guys named Biggs and Wedge.
Yep. Final Fantasy has always had a very strong Star Wars connection.
Yeah, I mean, they've had Biggs and Wedge like in most of the games, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember when they first did.
It's... I want to say since 4?
Yeah, someone would have to check that. So if you're listening, you have something to look up.
Yes.
Now you have homework.
True.
Congratulations.
Yes.
If you're still listening because you're here for Royals baseball, that is.
Very much agreed. Hey, thank you for the review, Dan. Do appreciate it. One more thing before we get on out of here. Where can folks find you on social media and your work? We were talking a lot about your social media presence, but not where to find you.
Oh, well, you can find me at fangraphs.com, like every day doing something. You can find me at Dan Szymborski on Twitter. And those two things, you can pretty much find me and stuff. Like don't come to my house and yell at me. That'd be really awkward. Just yell at me on Twitter.
Let's not. Jeremy, any last questions before we get on out of here?
Can I come to your house and play Trails with you?
Yeah, you can come play Trails. Anyone can come. Yeah.
Woo! Just no yelling. That's the only rule, I guess.
I mean, just don't let the cats out.
Oh yeah, no.
That too.
Don't want to do that.
All right, everyone out there who is still listening after the Final Fantasy and Trails talk, thank you so much for your support. Dan, one last time, thank you very much for joining us this evening on the episode. Please go check out Dan's work on FanGraphs. I'll have some links to his social down in the podcast description below, so go check those out. But until next time, go Royals!